Jujutsu Kaisen is no stranger to having fights that are completely one-sided. Every once in a while, sorcerers and curses alike find themselves in unfavorable matchups, and the nature of the power system in the series doesn't make matters any better. By virtue of the way the power system operates in the series, sorcerers are granted an edge, and so the average sorcerer would more times than not be stronger than the average curse. Because of this fact, a lot of times curses are no diffed, but this isn't just exclusive to curses in the series alone. After all, we have seen sorcerers and curse users alike suffer from unfavorable matchups. So why don't we cover 5 of the most iconic instances this is the case in the series. The characters we'll be considering for this list aren't necessarily weak, they just got bested because their corresponding opponents were immeasurably strong. Like, when you really get to thinking about it, what would most characters do within reason when facing off against monsters of Jujutsu like Gojo and Sukuna? The very first instance of this happening in this series actually happens with Jogo. Jogo is one of the more popular curse spirits in the series. He was assigned the rank of special grade, and his power proves that he's more than capable of living up to the name. Jogo, unlike any other character we have on this list, has actually been done dirty by this series in this format twice. First, back when he fought Gojo, and then later in the Shibuya Incident when he faced Sukuna. It's been talked about for a while now, but every once in a while it's good to have a reminder. Jogo is by no means weak. Yes, he's not top of the verse, but he's not your usual run-of-the-mill curse. Even though Jogo is granted the rank of special grade, he's pretty much up there when it comes to curses at least. Curses like Dagon and Hanami are also granted the rank of special grade, but those two don't really compare to Jogo in terms of sheer scale, versatility, and cost energy output. When Jogo is actually placed in favorable matchups, we see that he's able to make relatively light work of multiple grade 1 level sorcerers, and as I implied, Jogo did this without a care in the world. Of the 3 sorcerers Jogo attacked after Dagon's domain was dispelled, Naobito was the only one who didn't make it. If either Nanami or Maki were hit with the same attack, Jogo landed on Naobito. And then you can take it a step further by scaling Jogo from the feats of the other disaster curses. We saw that Mahito was basically able to one-shot a character like Nobara, and then Dagon in his domain was able to handle those 3 sorcerers who would later go on to be set on fire by Jogo, and Hanami was able to take a majority of the students at Jujutsu Tech. It would only take a hollow purple from Gojo himself to momentarily put the curse at rest. But where are we getting at with all this? Well, the point is, if Jogo had faced almost any other character in the series, then chances are he would have had a very high chance of success. Up until season 2, barring Gojo and Sukuna, there is only a handful of sorcerers with feats that compare to that of Jogo's. With the Volume 0 movie and the mere fact that Yuta was noted to be a special grade, and with the feats he pulled up from said movie, it seems pretty safe to assume that Yuta would be able to wipe Jogo. Yuki at that point in time doesn't really have feats, but when it comes to the manga, we know that even she will be able to beat the curse. Besides the special grades, there's really just Kenjaku and maybe Toji who would stand much of a chance against Jogo. Uraume doesn't have enough feats, but she's probably up there as well. All of the characters we've listed wouldn't even make up to a percentage of the verse, meaning that about 99% of the verse stands no chance against Jogo. He was only outclassed because of matchup. Which of his 2 fights did he have it worse? Well, that's up to you, the audience, to decide. Much like what we saw with Jogo, Dagon also suffers from a very similar vein in Shibuya. Dagon was pretty much the only member of the Disaster Curse family that didn't have his time to shine in season 1 of the anime. Shibuya hopes to correct this by putting Dagon up against 3 grade 1 level sorcerers. Naobito is the head of the Zenin clan and he's labeled as a supreme grade 1. Maki at this point in time is technically a semi grade 1 sorcerer. And then Nanami is just your standard capable grade 1 sorcerer. The combined effort of all 3 sorcerers would only prove to be nothing when faced up against the sheer might of Dagon. Obviously, with that statement, I'm not referring to base Dagon, but rather the version of him that enjoys the buff from a domain expansion. I'm not denying the fact that those 3 were honestly pressuring Dagon in base. In fact, I'd say those 3 were stronger than the curse. But with his domain expansion in use, it becomes a whole different matter entirely. Dagon is seen casually taking on all 3 of them. That's where Megumi and Toji comes in. After Megumi breaks into Dagon's domain, subsequently, Toji does as well, and this is where Dagon meets his demise. Dagon literally stood no chance against Toji, and this is most evident when you consider the fact that none of Dagon's attacks was able to land on the man with the heavenly restriction. Much like with Jogo, at this point in the story, there is a finite amount of sorcerers who'd actually be capable of exercising the curse. He was just unfortunate enough to have met someone on Toji's caliber. When we move away from anime-only material, it actually gets worse. Because when you get into the Culling games, The presence of unfavorable matchups becomes even more apparent. This can be best seen with most of Sukuna's fights. Take Sukuna vs Ishigori for example. For context, Ishigori was stationed at Sendai Colony. For all we know, we don't exactly have an official ranking for the course user, but it's pretty safe to say that he's somewhere around special grade. In fact, prior to Yuta's involvement, there were really just 2 others, including the Curse Spirits that would make it 3. The tops in this colony being Ryu Ishigori, Druve, Uro, and Kurorushi. But then Yuta joins the fray. And this is where we get to see just what Ishigori is actually capable of. First of all, we're introduced to his curse technique, the Granite Blast, a massive burst of cursed energy that he releases from hair follicles on his head. With this, it's explained that in all of history, Ishigori is known to have the highest cursed energy output known to Jujutsu and the world at large, this obviously including the Heian era. But Ishigori is not just a one-trick pony. Besides his curse technique, Granite Blast, Ishigori is also a known user of domain expansions, though we don't exactly know what his entails, because the 3-way domain deadlock was interrupted unfortunately. But there's still more to his character. Ishigori was seen boxing with Yuta and Rika, individually and at times both against just himself. This should obviously not be dismissed as a meager feat. After all, Yuta Okotsu is a special grade sorcerer, one who's been implied to be the strongest sorcerer besides Satoru Gojo in the modern times, multiple times for that matter, and this Culling game player Ishigori was keeping up with him for the most part. This actually directly scales Ishigori to Yuta, a special grade. And what happens next? A couple chapters after this fight in the manga, Ishigori would go on to be no-diffed by the King of Curses. When Sukuna entered Sendai Colony, Ishigori stood in his way. He offered Ishigori the option of stepping back, but Ishigori declined. This displeased Sukuna. He would go on to use Dismantle against Ryu, but Sukuna's Dismantle would prove to be ineffective. Sukuna would then adjust his Dismantle to suit Ishigori's cost energy output, and it would be right then and there where Sukuna would casually cut Ishigori while he was making an attempt to power up a Granite Blast. If you got the gist, then you would understand that this isn't just an Ishigori thing. This is exactly how things would go down for most of the other characters in this series, if not worse. That is when they face off against an opponent like Sukuna. Shortly after Sukuna is done with Ishigori, he would go on to get his next victim. A fellow sorcerer from the Heian era, Yorozu, challenged Sukuna. As it comes with challenging Sukuna, you the challenger should prepare yourself for death, as that has more times than none been the only outcome. Yorozu, unlike Ishigori, actually puts on a display, but maybe this is because Sukuna didn't choose to use his own innate curse technique due to the fact that he wanted to sink Megumi's soul further into the abyss. With the feats Yorozu pulled off, it's certain that she was no slouch. Her domain expansion's sure hit stroke curse technique maximum is actually very OP. It's arguable if there's more than 2 characters in the verse who could cancel her perfect sphere without a domain of their own. The main reason Sukuna was able to counter that attack was the 10 Shadows Maharaga, and at this point Maharaga needs no introduction. He's the strongest Shikigami the 10 Shadows has to offer, and even JJK as a whole. With the feats Yorozu pulled off in that fight, there is presumably just a handful of sorcerers who would be able to take her on one-on-one in a fight and come out on top. So she was just one of the many victims of bad matchups in JJK. Unlike the others though, she seems to have been the one who did herself in. After all, she went looking for Sukuna and not the other way around. And the very same thing can be said with the final character on the list, and that's none other than Kashimo. Kashimo had some of the most hype backing up his name from the very beginning, way back from when he was introduced in the beginning of the Culling games. Without prior screen time, Kashimo was introduced to be the player with the most points in the Culling games so far, at least at that point. But what made Kashimo all the more interesting was the fact that he wanted to face Sukuna. And at some point in the story, at least reading the manga, people thought that Kashimo was really all that. But his fight with Sukuna proved that Kashimo wasn't on the top level. Don't get me wrong, this isn't to discredit Kashimo's strength. He was the strongest of an era and he's undeniably still one of the top of the verse. But he's simply nowhere near the level of Gojo and Sukuna. But that's pretty much just it. Against any other opponent, Kashimo would have done a whole lot better. Much like how Ryu was able to keep up with Yuta for the most part, Kashimo had no trouble doing the same with Hakari. And Hakari, as we all know, has multiple statements that imply that he's somewhat relative to Yuta. When you factor all this in, you see that Kashimo was just another victim of circumstance. With this being JJK, you notice that a lot of these unfortunate matchups comes by virtue of Sukuna, as Sukuna doesn't like to make things easy for anyone. Also, with this being Jujutsu Kaisen, there's actually a whole lot of other unfortunate matchups I couldn't cover. But if you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to leave a like. If you have something to add, then you can put it in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date with the channel, then please feel free to subscribe.